So let's get started with how I came to this work. And I suppose firstly, it would be useful to know what is soul loss and what is soul retrieval. So soul loss is what happens when we essentially lose a piece of our soul, or we lose a part of our self. And this happens when we undergo trauma. And what happens energetically is a fragment of our heart field disengages and gets lost or left behind somewhere. Soul retrieval is essentially the process of going back and retrieving that part of your soul, bringing that part of your energy back into your energy field and integrating it into your energy field. And it's a process that has been done by traditional healers, by shamans for thousands and thousands of years. Anthropologists who have worked with and studied with traditional healers have found similar processes across the world. And, you know, the rituals might be different, but essentially they're doing the same thing. And you know, tribal cultures from Asia, Russia, Siberia, North America, South America, Australia, they all do this process in some way or another. And you'll see why this evening. How I came to the work was really quite interesting. Many years ago, when I was living in London, I encountered something called timeline therapy. Now, some of you guys might have heard of timeline therapy, but it isn't very well known. And a few years after first encountering it, I actually went to study it. And, you know, I'd studied some things like, I studied coaching, and then I went into NLP and hypnosis. And then one of the things that I also studied was timeline therapy. And I didn't really do too much with it at the time. And I left London, came back to South Africa, and kind of try to get a real job. And some of you guys will know my story. That didn't work out. And I landed up on this healing journey and started doing energy healing, and doing quite a lot of work on myself, and then starting to work with other people and so on. At that stage, I came across the shamanic soul retrieval process, and I kind of recognized the similarities between the shamanic soul retrieval and what I had studied as timeline therapy. And at that stage, I was starting to do a lot of energy healing. And as I was working with my clients, a process started to unfold quite naturally as I worked with my clients. Now, those of you who are healers in whatever way, shape, or form that is, will recognize that your clients bring you what you need to learn. You know, there's some kind of magic that happens, and the clients that come to see you kind of take you on a journey. And you know, they almost seem to come in waves. There's like there'll be a wave of clients that are all dealing with the same thing, something that perhaps you need to heal for yourself, or perhaps something that you need to learn, or a new technique, and so on. And it was really quite interesting that this process that I suppose has been refined over the last few years that I'm going to be talking about this evening, kind of just developed quite naturally as I worked with my clients. So there really are a few ways to do the soul retrieval process. I'm just going to bring up a slide here to show you. Just hang on one second. All right, there we go. Okay. So when it comes to soul retrieval, and I suppose the shamanic practitioners might not agree with this, because the way that I look at soul retrieval, although we learned the process from shamanic cultures, what I call soul retrieval is the process of reintegrating a lost part of the soul, rather than the ritual or the method by which it is done. Now, on the one end of the spectrum, we have the shamanic method. And how it is done in the shamanic culture is that the shaman goes into a trance, either through a ritual or a process, or just through a drumming process. And the shaman goes to what they would call the lower world, the middle world, or the upper world, to find and retrieve this lost part of the soul. And the shaman then brings it back, and through some process or another reintegrates that part of the soul into the person's energy field. So and I suspect it's from the Americas, what the shaman does there is they blow the soul into the heart and into the top of the head, into the crown chakra. But there's a tribe or a group of people in Southeast Asia, and what they do is they entice that part of the soul with gifts and foods and flowers, and the person who's receiving the healing would then perhaps eat some treats, some cakes or something, if that's what the person liked, or if that's what that part of their soul would resonate with. They would do something like that to entice that piece of the soul into their energy field. So, there are a number of ways that different traditional healers do this process. But effectively, the shaman is responsible for fetching that part of the soul, bringing it back and reintegrating it into the client or into the patient's energy field. Moving along from that, a process, what I call a shamanic interactive process, is another method that I was taught, where a healer, a psychic, a clairvoyant might do some of the process and talk the client through the other parts of the process. So, they would be perhaps in a connected state, perhaps starting off with a light meditation, some grounding and attunement, and then just in a conversation, taking the client to a particular time of their life at which a trauma may have occurred, and just talking that through and doing some healing around that. Okay. So that method is partly done by the healer and partly done by the client. The next method, what I call a deep guided method, is probably my favorite method for doing this process. And in the deep guided process, what I do with my clients is I take them on a guided meditation. I get them into the right mental state to do this work through a deep meditation and some breathing exercises, etc., to get them into a deep alpha state in which they can access the information that they need. And what I like about this method is that the client gets to see for themselves and learn for themselves and do the healing that's required for themselves, and to reintegrate that lost part of their soul for themselves. So there is a great opportunity for learning and soul growth, as well as a great opportunity for a shift in consciousness. It is it can be quite an emotional process. You know, if you think about going back to a trauma, it can be emotional to go back to that time and that place. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. You know, quite often people can simply observe what has happened or just understand what has happened and coming at it perhaps many years later with a lot more wisdom and understanding about perhaps why things happened the way they did. So, you know, sometimes it is emotional, sometimes it's not, and, you know, it can be quite matter of fact. Yeah. All right. The other process moving along this continuum is what I would call a conversational interactive process. Now, not everybody likes to do a meditation. Some people struggle with meditation. I know many years ago, I actually would have struggled with a meditation. You know, some people, as soon as you say they're going to meditate and perhaps they're going to access some information, they like start wondering, okay, I'm not hearing any voices, I'm not seeing anything, is this working? You know, I don't think I can do this. Am I doing it right? And you know, they just block themselves. And I know what that's like, because, you know, when I started on this journey, I was like that. And what you can quite simply do is have a conversation with a person. You may not be able to access deeper stuff, like more traumatic stuff that has perhaps been blocked out by the conscious mind. And you would struggle to, you're probably impossible to access past life trauma with a conversational method, but you could quite easily just have a conversation and ask somebody to tell you about what happened at a certain age. You know, you could, a client might tell you something happened when they were 5, and you could say, okay, well, let's talk about this. And you could take them through the same steps as if you were doing a deep guided method. You could take them through the same steps as, you know, what I found is all these methods need to follow the same steps. And we'll come to that in a second, but you can do it in a casual conversation, simply holding space for that person. All right. Now, you know, like I've said, if somebody doesn't want to do a meditation or they're struggling with that, this would be the process to use. And I've used it a number of times, you know, in that situation. The next process was what I'd call a self-retrieval. If you know the steps to follow, you can do the process for yourself. And this is something that I've done for myself many times. When I was learning this process, I took myself through these steps, and I went back in time to find the lost aspects of my soul, and I did the healing, and I brought it back and did that. And yeah, for some of you, you might be quite attracted to doing this process in that way. Certainly, you know, if you're a healer and you want to learn the process, practicing on yourself is a good place to start. And then what I've put at the other end of this continuum is what I call it like a self-accidental. I don't think this is very common, but I do think it is possible that if somebody were consciously healing and working on a past trauma, they might reintegrate this lost part of their soul quite by accident. Or it might reintegrate by accident, even though the intention would have always been to heal. And I think what happens is, if you did perhaps have a past trauma and you were processing it, if you were sitting with that trauma, thinking about it, perhaps even journaling to deepen your understanding, or just spending a lot of time in contemplation around it, and you did sufficient work and healing, you may find that that lost soul aspect would spontaneously reintegrate into your energy field. And the reason I think this is possible is because when I've been taking people on a deep guided process, I have found that sometimes quite spontaneously after the healing is done, that soul aspect integrates into the energy field on its own. it kind of like just happens, and people say things like, okay, connected to the soul aspect, but it's disappeared now. It's come into me, or I feel it's merged into my energy already, even before we've got to that step in the process. So, I do think it is possible. But yeah, it would be hard to actually study that or analyze it without the person actually knowing what they were doing in any case, in which case it wouldn't be accidental, it would be intentional. All right. The shamanic method is very powerful and useful. And I tend to use the shamanic method when working with children or with animals. And I'll share an example of that in a second. But why it's useful in that case is because you don't need the other person to be providing any information. The other person is really quite passive in the shamanic method. So I'll tell you a story about my mother-in-law's dog. And a few years back, a message went out on the family WhatsApp group. She's really worried about the dog. The dog is vomiting, it's not eating, it's been, a day or two, and it was a Saturday, and she lives quite far out of town, and she was going to drive on a Saturday night to go to a vet, a 24-hour vet, like an hour away. And, my wife quickly showed this message to me and told her mother to just hang on. And I went in, and I'd already done some healing, some energy work on the dog before. So I kind of knew the dog's energy. I'd already cleared emotional blockages from the aura. So I kind of had a sense that, I wouldn't need to repeat that work. So as I connected to the dog's energy and started sensing what was going on, I quickly got a sense that there was a soul loss, and I needed to do a soul retrieval process for the dog. And what I found is, as I connected to the energy and I went back to the trauma, it just went back a few months to when the other family dog had died. And what had happened is the other dog had got out of the property and went wandering, and went to a main road and was hit by a car on the main road. And the surviving dog didn't know what had happened. 1 minute its buddy, playmate, and friend was there with it, and then the dog was gone. Its friend was gone. And nobody ever took the time to explain to the surviving dog what had happened. And so, I connected with the dog and did the healing and explained what had happened and reintegrated that part of the soul. And my mother-in-law just said, the dog kind of just went to sleep and was quite calm and was sleeping. The next day, the dog was right as rain, no problem, was up, eating, happy, not a problem at all. So, yeah, that's a good time to, for me or for somebody to do the shamanic method where the other person can't be a participant. I've done this process for my daughter a number of times as well, when I've noticed something coming up and, she was too young to be a part of the process, and I'd use the shamanic method for that. And just while we're talking about animals, I mean, when I started this, I didn't really know that you could do a soul retrieval on an animal. I guess I'd never thought about it. I suppose if I had to think about it, I'd say, well, it's quite possible that this could happen with an animal. But I was working with a colleague, and I was taking her on a guided healing process. She wanted to do some work on a dog who had been sick, and as we started the process, she started connecting to the dog's energy, and just from what she was saying and what was going on, I kind of realized, okay, wait a second, yeah, we're doing a soul retrieval on an animal. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And even more interesting was that in that case, It was a past life soul retrieval. She was taken back to the dog's previous lifetime and was shown, and I mean, you know, this particular person is very clairvoyant. So, you know, she was getting great information. She was shown the dog being thrown over a bridge into a river. And that trauma was still there in the dog's energy. So, you know, I guided her through the process as if I was doing a soul retrieval with a person. And, you know, she brought back the part of the soul and reintegrated it into the dog's energy field and did the healing. And, you know, the dog's symptoms improved and the dog's health improved. So, yeah, that was an interesting one. Yeah. All right. So that's when I would do that shamanic method. And then, like I say, mostly what I do is this deep interactive process. Let me pull that slide up again. This deep guided process where I guide people through a deep meditation to a past trauma or even a past life trauma. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Common symptoms of soul loss. Now, it's quite interesting and it's important to know this. And the things that come up most often when people have soul loss are the following: an emotion with no apparent source. So people often have anxiety and they don't know why they're feeling anxious, or they're depressed and they don't know why they're depressed, or they've got anger issues. They don't know where this anger is coming from. Or whatever the case may be. But an emotion that doesn't seem to have a source would be one of the symptoms. Often depression is a symptom, because when you've lost a piece of your soul, you've lost a part of your spirit, you kind of lose some vitality, you lose energy, you lose life force energy, and that does leave one feeling quite flat and quite depressed. The other symptom, almost contradictory to an emotion with no apparent source, is ruminating over an event. Now, in this case, you might feel a strong negative emotion and your mind can't get over a particular trauma. Your mind keeps spinning, like wheels spinning in the mud, and just keeps thinking about whatever it was that happened. And that's a sign that there's some healing that needs to take place around that event. May not necessarily be soul loss, but there'd certainly be healing that's needed at that event. Then subtle or not so subtle behaviors or behavior changes. Now, I've learned this through my daughter. And I suppose what's important to say at this stage is, as we bring more light into our being, into our energy bodies, we tend to push stuff to the surface that is in need of healing. And that sort of stuff that needs healing presents itself in many ways. Sometimes it is physical. You can feel a discomfort of an energetic blockage within your energy body. Sometimes it is emotional. You just feel certain emotions that have come up to the surface for healing. Or it can be behavioral. You know, your behavior changes because of some emotions that you may not be expressing outwardly, but you're feeling inwardly. And what I noticed with my daughter is, as stuff would come up to the surface, her behavior would change in some subtle or sometimes not so subtle ways. So, you know, she might have been clingy towards one parent or the other, you know, and it tended to shift between my wife and I as we went through this process. Or she'd just be a little bit needy or a little bit tearful, and that would be a sign that there would be some healing that was needed. And, you know, if something came, you know, whenever something comes up with anyone in the family, I'd connect and see if there's something going on energetically, and typically there normally is. And you can find what the source of that is, and then do the healing. And when we're going through the soul retrieval process, and I was learning from my daughter, that's what came up a lot. So the next symptom is no mojo, or an inability to move on in life. So feeling stuck, like not having any motivation to move forward on a project or to take action in life, just really feeling like your legs are stuck in the mud. You may feel fatigue or have like low levels of energy. This is because the soul loss is a lack of energy in your heart field. Now, this is the driver of energy, one of the primary drivers of energy through your energetic anatomy. You get energy coming down your divine channel from source, from above, from earth, from below, and this kind of merges in your heart field and your heart center, which then feeds out into your heart field. When your heart field is missing parts, that energy is inhibited. All right. And back in the early days, as I was exploring this, I would actually, I was measuring heart frequency. So I would take just take a measurement of a heart frequency on created a like a yardstick to work with, and often the heart frequency was below optimum when a soul retrieval was needed. And then after the soul retrieval, there would be a measurable increase in that heart frequency. I don't really do that anymore because I kind of know what's going to happen, but it was an interesting process and an interesting learning experience. All right. So with soul loss, the other common symptom is a weak immune system. Because you don't have that life force energy flowing through, the immune system can be weaker. And because the soul loss is part of the heart field, often there's a tightness in the chest or even a pain in the chest. And this is quite noticeable once that soul retrieval has been done. People often feel an expansion in the chest. So you feel that energy coming in, and sort of like the whole heart field opens up, and you can feel that expansion. You can feel that energy coming into the heart field. All right. Sometimes there's another non-physical pain. So if you're sensing some discomfort in the body, sometimes people have been to every doctor, every specialist, every medical professional to explore pain or discomfort in the body, and the doctors can't find anything. And you go in energetically, and you can find there's an energetic blockage there, and often linked to that blockage is soul loss. All right. Addictions is one of the other symptoms. Quite typically, people trying to fill a hole in their lives or trying to fill the void. Soul loss can leave a void-like feeling within the heart or within the soul, and people try and fill that void with sugar, sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, whatever addiction you need, that can be used to try to fill this void, unsuccessfully. But it does provide a clue that there's some healing required. The other symptom of soul loss is somebody feeling ungrounded or out of body. Now, when a trauma occurs, so let's actually just talk about this for a second. So how does soul loss actually occur? So when there's trauma, a part of the soul leaves the energy body in order to cope. So it's a coping mechanism for trauma. That feeling of being out of body leaves one feeling very ungrounded. Now, how do you know if you're ungrounded? The common symptoms of being ungrounded are a clumsiness, bumping into things, dropping your keys, etc. So ungroundedness is a common symptom of soul loss or being out of the body. So going back to how the soul loss occurs, like I said, trauma causes a part of the energy to leave in order to cope. So it's a coping mechanism, and trauma is relative. So it's important to note that what one person considers traumatic might not be considered traumatic by another person. So for a young child, a baby in a cot might consider a parent not coming when the baby cries as traumatic. So the baby might think it is a life-threatening situation if the baby is crying and no parent comes. And I've done soul retrievals just like this, where there's soul loss from being left in a cot crying. But for somebody else, that might not be the case. You know, sometimes it could be a situation where there's a genuine life-threatening situation, like a car accident. And for people who've had car accidents, soul loss is actually quite common, because in that moment, you feel your life is under threat, and a part of your soul may leave the body. And a lot of people actually talk about accidents as if they've witnessed the accident from a different vantage point. So let's go into the next slide, because we talked just about that point. Things that people who have soul loss might say. So these are some examples that I've heard of and with my clients. A person might say, I lost a part of myself that day, or I feel shattered, or I felt shattered. I don't remember my childhood. Or they might say, I feel numb, or I feel like I wasn't there. I could see myself from above. And quite literally, I mean, if you think of, perhaps you got a friend who had their heart broken in a difficult breakup, they might actually say, it felt like my heart shattered. Or I lost a part of myself that day, you know, just speaking about the breakup. So, you know, if you've ever found yourself saying stuff like that, you know, that might have been what actually happened. All right. So what comes next? Let me just take a look at my notes quickly. Those are the symptoms. That is how it's caused. Let me give you some examples. Yeah, let's go into an example of the soul loss, because you can go through this process and, you know, that part of the soul may not be ready to come back. So let's get the next slide. I just want to show you guys the outline of the process that I work with. Okay, so 6 steps to effective and safe soul retrieval. This isn't linear. The process is more random than linear, but I always tend to start with going into a relaxed alpha state. The thing is, when I'm working with a client, they might have already started talking about the past event. So if they're conscious of it, they might come in, sit down in the chair and start talking about the event, you know, straight off the bat, they'll start talking about it. So, you know, this isn't a linear process, but I typically go through these steps. Relaxed alpha state, go to the past event, do the healing, find out if that part of the soul is ready. So test for readiness, then do the integration, and then do some assimilation, which would take place post-session. I've got an extra step that sits in there somewhere between readiness and integration, is anyone or anything else. Now, that part of the soul that you have connected with may not be ready to integrate. And I'll give you an example of somebody that I worked with. They grew up in a country that was at civil war. There's a civil war taking place. And the guy described the process of being at school one day, and, you know, there was some kind of attack, and all the parents were called and they had to come and fetch their children. And on the way home from school, their car came under fire. So there were people shooting at the car that this, and he was, you know, young at that stage, let's say 5 or 6. And in that moment, ducked down under the seat, he thought he was going to die. In doing the soul retrieval process, going back and connecting to that lost part of his soul and doing some healing, at the end of the healing, that part of the soul still wasn't ready to come back into ordinary reality. It wasn't ready to come back into his energy field. So we had to leave that part of the soul there. Okay. Yeah. And in another example where just talking about the sort of non-linear way that this works, I worked with a client who had experienced some sexual trauma as a child. But in doing the soul retrieval process, when we went back to the past event, we were actually taken back to a past life. She described being roughly 12 years old in a coal mine in Wales. And the family was poor, so the children had to work. But if you can imagine a young girl being in a coal mine full of men, yeah, so she experienced sexual trauma in the coal mine. We did the healing on that aspect of the soul. But before that aspect of the soul was ready to come back and reintegrate, we then had to go to another trauma. And then we're taken to a trauma in the current life, where we had to heal a sexual trauma from her childhood in the current life. Once that was healed, we could then go back to the past life trauma. At that stage, that aspect of the soul was ready and willing to reintegrate, and we could gently bring that aspect of the soul back, as well as the aspect from the current life. Yeah, so one needs to be a bit flexible in working through this process. All right. Let's just take a moment here. Let me just see what else is on my list to speak about now. I've got so many examples to talk about, but I think they'll come up in the Q&A. All right, yeah, I wanted to talk about cases where there were actually some physical symptoms that needed to that were quite strong, some powerful physical symptoms where healing took place. And in one of these examples, I had a client who came to me with severe and debilitating period pain. Now, I don't really know what this is like, but I've had enough clients who've experienced this that, you know, I had a strong suspicion that there was a past sexual trauma or past life sexual trauma. And what happened is, as we went back into the past trauma, she described being in a place where she was in a past life, standing on a riverbank as a young girl. And then she described her creepy uncle walking along the riverbank towards her. We did the healing on that aspect of the soul. And as soon as we'd finished the healing on the soul, she was then taken to another previous lifetime. And she went to a place where she was 15 years old and she was being held down by soldiers. And she got the information and the knowledge that she had rejected the advances of one of the soldiers. And he had then gone and got some friends and come back to take revenge. So we managed to do the healing on that aspect, integrate it, managed to do the healing or reintegrate the other aspect, and did the healing, and the symptoms then improved. All right. So, you know, I've seen these cases where the physical symptoms do really improve, and it can be quite rapid. Other cases which have been quite interesting is it's working with a client who was a businessman, and we had been working together for some time, and he was sort of like, quite aware of how this process was working. But what he found is at work, he was responding as if he was a child. So if his boss disagreed with him or challenged him on anything, he found himself getting quite frustrated and quite annoyed and internally throwing a tantrum. And he found that this was inhibiting his performance at work. So when we did the healing, we went back through that trauma, and he found himself as a young child being disciplined by his father. And he described his father as being quite strict and quite a strong disciplinarian, but also his father having quite a temper. And so as a child, when something didn't go his way, if he got upset, he would get into a lot of trouble from his father. And a part of his soul had fragmented in that situation. And after the healing, he wasn't being triggered in that way at work anymore. All right. So because the trauma was healed at source, the trigger was he wasn't triggered anymore. Basically, we had removed the trigger, and his performance at work could improve. All right. Let's see. Anxiety is another interesting case. So, anxiety seems so prevalent at the moment. I had a client who came to me with severe anxiety, and we went through the process, and we went back to the past trauma, and she went back to a past life where she found herself and described being in a basement, in a dark, small basement, and she could almost see through the floorboards above. And as she sort of looked up through the floorboards, there was a nasty man, and this guy was essentially he murdered somebody else while she was hiding in the basement. And we didn't get too much more information than that, but we managed to do the healing on that soul aspect, reintegrated, and the anxiety improved drastically. All right, so that's that. We've got some more examples we might come to later. There was one I wanted to remember. I'll see if I can remember it in a second. Let's go back to the slides before we go to the Q&A. Just remember to post your questions in the Q&A tab. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so if we go back to step 1 in this process that isn't linear, relax into an alpha state. I've got 5 steps that I follow to do this. I do it for myself, I do it for my clients, and I find that by following these 5 steps, people can have a powerful meditation, they can access more information, they can do more powerful healing, and basically be more effective at this whole process. The first step, connect to the energy of Mother Earth. So you're going to ground yourself. Perhaps you're going to imagine roots connecting you to the energy of the earth. More and more, what I do these days is I actually open my heart to the heart of Mother Earth. I create a heart connection to Gaia. And because the frequency of Mother Earth is rising at the moment, because her energy is blossoming, you might find this actually quite a powerful process to do in your meditations. Open your heart to Mother Earth. The next step that I do is to align with higher self. So this is quite simply an intention. I breathe through the heart. I set an intention on bringing myself into alignment with my higher self. If I'm guiding a client, I guide them to do the same thing. And this is really quite powerful, because once you're aligned with your higher self, you can ask questions of your higher self. Your higher self is that part of you that is constantly connected to the divine. It's the part of you that contains all knowledge and all wisdom. And it's the part of you that has access to all the answers to any question that you might ask. So why this is so important is that if you ever get stuck in this process, or you need to just check a couple of things, you can always ask your higher self a question. And this is one of the safety checks that we do in this process, just to make sure that that part of the soul is ready to reintegrate into the energy body. All right. The next step is to attune with source. This is connect to a God of your understanding, to the creator. And you do this through the crown chakra from above. You imagine that light pouring into your body, and you breathe that light through your heart. I like to breathe that light through the body, and I guide my clients to do the same. As always, with doing any energy work or meditations, I like to do a protective field, just surrounding the energy field with a bubble of light. This protects you against any negative energy in the environment, just to make sure that whilst you're doing this process, you're not picking up emotions or energetic debris or anything else from anywhere else in the environment that you work with, and in the room that you're in. But also because energetically you're going to be traveling through time and space, you might just come across negative energy in those spaces as well. And then the fifth step is to center in the heart. Focus on the heart center. Take a few breaths, breathe love and light through the heart center. This strengthens the energy field. It kind of provides a sense of safety, and it is a useful healing tool to breathe that light through the heart and to any part of the soul or any part of the body that needs healing. So I pretty much always do these 5 steps for myself when I'm working, when I'm meditating, and for my clients. All right. So with that out the way, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A, and I'm going to just see what questions are coming up. And I'm sure we'll be able to take things a little bit further once we've had a look there. All right. Okay, from Alexandra, who I did work with recently. One question I have, do I think that the soul needs to be 100% here in order to be healthy and fully functional in this lifetime? Alexandra, I don't think so, because most people are missing soul parts. I think most people are going through their life with little fragments of their soul missing. I think these fragments are minuscule compared to the size of the soul. I think they're quite small, but I think people generally have quite a few missing parts. I know when I was learning this process, at the time that I was learning the process, in a period of a few weeks, I did 7 or 8 current life soul retrievals and about the same past life soul retrievals. And I know I did even more since then. And, I was healthy and functional, maybe not fully functional. I think that as we bring back more of our soul, we can optimize our performance in the world. That sounds like a bit, yeah, maybe it doesn't sound right, but we can live life more fully is actually what I'm trying to say. We can optimize our lives to live life more fully, and we can be more effective at whatever it is we're trying to do in this world, because when we put our intention to something, we're coming with more of our soul. We're coming with the full weight of our being into anything. And I think what we see when we see people who are remarkably successful, I think that they've incarnated with less damage in their soul, and they can really put that forward into their life. All right, thanks, Alex. Okay, Ariane. Regarding heart frequency, can constant low blood pressure be an indication? I'm not sure, Ariane. It might be. If somebody had low blood pressure, I would explore the energy of the physical heart. I would also explore the heart center, the heart field, and soul loss, I would look at a number of things, but it's definitely, it may well be related to it. I haven't done any personal study on this to create a correlation, so I can't answer more effectively than that, I'm afraid. Okay, done. Tamron. Okay, what is an alpha state? An alpha state is a meditative state of the mind. The brain has a number of frequency bands that it operates in. Day-to-day consciousness, just operating on at work, doing your day-to-day business, you're in what's called the beta state. As your mind slows down, as you're falling asleep, as you're waking up, or as you're meditating, you go into an alpha state. So the brainwaves slow down a bit. It is a state in which you can access deeper levels of creativity, intuition, and certain psychic experiences. Deeper than the alpha state is theta, which is a very deep meditative state. If you think of monks sitting in the Himalayas, they can access that theta state quite readily. And then below that is delta, which is really a sleep state. And then above beta is gamma, which is a sort of a different state where your mind is very active and focused. All right, so that's done. Okay, another good question. Thank you, Tamron. What happens if that soul is not ready to reintegrate? So my belief is that you don't force that part of the soul to integrate. If it's not ready, you do the healing. Then one of the things that you do is you find out if there's something that it needs. Perhaps that part of the soul needs you to do something. And there are a number of different things that could be done, but you basically ask that part of the soul, is there anything that it needs? If it is still not ready, you just say goodbye and let it know that you love it and that you'll be back for it. So where there has been severe trauma, it might take a few visits to go back to that soul, quite a few sessions of healing, to spend some time there, meeting its requirements, and then hopefully it'll be ready. So yeah, if it's not ready, just leave it, and then we go back when ready. Okay. Okay, Corey, I'm just going to read this out. It's quite long. My eldest daughter passed away some 7 years ago at age 29. She was never married, and as a result of ongoing ear infections, had to undergo 29 operations throughout her life. As a result of medical negligence, she succumbed to, as a result of pulmonary embolism. I was out of the country at the time of her passing. Her mother and our remaining daughter was called and spent with her till she passed. Her mother cannot seem to accept or understand her death, whilst I've managed to carry on with life, as I found the books of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross very helpful. Her mother, on the other hand, has no interest in attending any trauma sessions. Any suggestions or advice? Okay, Corey. Yes. Healing is possible, and going back and doing that healing, quite possibly, it does sound like there is soul loss around that death. And I know I've worked with people who have experienced miscarriages or had stillborn or lost children. Absolutely, that sounds like that what happened could cause soul loss. But even if her mother isn't ready for the soul retrieval, just, getting some talk therapy and building up to a readiness to do that would be useful. Okay, thanks, Corey. And feel free to contact me by email if you need more information. If you want to talk about this more, do feel free to contact me. What would prevent an aspect from wanting to reintegrate? Okay, thanks, Natalie. if it's not ready, if it feels that the person isn't ready to meet its needs. So quite commonly, let's say there's a soul loss from childhood, that young child, that soul aspect of the young child wants to be recognized, they want to be loved, they want to be understood, they want the person to have joy in their life. And I guess if it feels that it's not going to get these needs met, it may not be ready. So then it sort of goes back to a more general healing process that the person can go through to get themselves into a place where they can experience more joy in their lives, where they can hold space for their inner child. All right, I hope that answers your question. Hi, Verona. Okay, how does the healing work? So what I do when I'm doing a soul retrieval, if I'm guiding a client through the process, we channel light into that soul aspect. So the soul aspect, if you've connected visually to that, you may see it as that younger self. So if you're doing, say, for example, a soul retrieval on the 5-year-old version of yourself, a part of your soul that left at the age of 5, you may see in your mind's eye that 5-year-old version of you. And then you imagine and intend channeling healing towards that 5-year-old version of you. And what I like to do whilst that's taking place, just to speak to that 5-year-old, give them words of love and encouragement and comfort them. Whatever. It's your conversation with your 5-year-old version of you. So, you just say whatever it is you feel you need to say. Okay, thanks, Verona. Emily Reed, are we able to retroactively heal, protect, prevent soul loss before the incident? Emily, yes. I think as we grow up, we tend to learn better coping tools to trauma. We become better at dealing with traumatic events in our life. But should there be a traumatic event that is significant, I think it wouldn't be preventable, because I think, say, for example, a car accident, death of a loved one, loss of a pet, or whatever, it's hard to prevent soul loss in those situations unless perhaps you've reached a certain level of spiritual enlightenment where you understand things from a higher perspective. So would an enlightened master like Jesus experience soul loss? I suspect not, because they might see things from a different perspective. But for the rest of us mere mortals, I think it is possible that we would experience soul loss in those situations. Yeah. All right. Okay, let's just do a couple more questions and then we'll just go back and wrap things up. Okay, let's see. From Bianca, hi Mark, is it safe to say that any trauma, subtle or more, that there is place for soul retrieval work? I wouldn't say any trauma, although you could work through the same process for any trauma, even if a part of the soul hasn't fragmented. Some traumas simply result in energetic blockages in the aura or in the chakras. Okay, so not all trauma leads to a fragmentation of the soul or to a fragmentation of the heart field, as I understand it. But you can use the same process, the same steps that I mentioned earlier to do the healing. And it is an effective way of healing. Okay. There's a question. Okay, Alex, is there a link to soul loss and autoimmune type disease? Alex, in my experience with autoimmune type disease, it's a lot more complicated. So yes, there typically is soul loss, because, like I said, a lot of people have soul loss, but in my experience with autoimmune type disease, there's a lot more energetic damage within the energetic anatomy that needs to be healed. And that is a longer process. Okay. Erica says, am I more inclined to lose soul parts or be triggered when then open a part of your energy body when in a state of fear, low self-esteem? Yes, I would also say that being in a state of fear or low self-esteem is a result of soul loss in any case. So, you know, that healing process is a slow and long process. Okay. What's my take on working on this lost soul aspect by intentionally healing through somatic practices such as TRE or conscious dance? Nice question, Janine. Yes, I think it is possible that that healing does take place through those practices. Like I say, it's hard to know without actually doing it. I do like to, and sometimes I include a somatic release process of that energy in the soul retrieval process. But I'm not sure if simply doing something like TRE or conscious dance would cause retrieval spontaneously, but I would say it's definitely possible. Yeah, so that's that. And thank you for being here. It's been great. I really, this work is so important. I do this process. I probably do this process 10 times a week with clients because it is out there. People's souls are crying out for healing. And it's really important that more people learn how to do this process. If you're a healer, this is a great tool to add to your toolbox. You really can change lives significantly. You can change the trajectory of somebody's life by taking them through this process. So if you're interested, I really do encourage you to learn how to do this with your clients. All right. That is it. I'm going to wrap things up. It's already 9:10. I've had a great time. Thanks for being here, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.